My name is John Glanzer, former commissioner of the city of Newberry for 18 years, mayor for 4.5, and currently serving as the city manager of the city of Archer. I do not pretend to be an attorney. I do not pretend to know case law, and I do know that the the U.S. Constitution is challenged daily in our Supreme Court, and is a living document that changes daily in our Supreme Court. We have a local attorney here in town, Allison Folds, who once said that a court is where two attorneys agree to settle their differences. And that's what we have here. We have a situation with a proposed amendment that is going to protect municipalities' home rule powers. I don't think any of us in any of our municipalities, and I understand that I cannot guarantee the future decisions of any future members of any commissions or boards, but none of us intend by this ordinance to do anything that would bring harm to the county or to our citizens in the way of environmental laws or things like that. But we do not want to be dictated by rogue referendum that may tell us that we have to put solar panels on new developments in our communities, or that all streets in our communities have to be curbed and guttered with stormwater systems. These are things that communities have a right to decide on. They have their own way of raising funds within their communities, and in some of our communities, those funding mechanisms are strained to the limit at these days. We cannot afford unnecessary referendums passed on us that provide for unnecessary interference in our government of our communities. I'm not asking for anything here other than the fact that this amendment be given the review it deserves. We're experiencing now in our state government a movement in Amendment 4 that's going to provide, if it succeeds, unnecessary review on the part of all of our communities by forcing a referendum on any type of comprehensive plan change that takes place. And trust me, there are hundreds of things that can happen in a community that require a comprehensive land change. How are we going to afford to pay for that? So on one hand, we have the state legislature considering a referendum that's going to hamstring us by forcing review of every single thing we do. And here we have a board that is wanting to deny us our right to review of this amendment. I urge you to take it forward to public hearing. I believe that there are some amendments that can be made to this that may make it more palatable to everyone here. But I think it's a fact that it needs to have a fair hearing in front of this community and a vote by this community. And it can go up or down, but we just feel that we have a right as representatives of our municipalities to ask that we have some protection from those type of referendum that we talked about 10% of the vote. Okay, we all know that what's our average turnout when we have a county election here? 20, 30%, especially if it's a referendum vote. Okay, maybe 40%. So we've got 60% of the people, or maybe actually 80% of the people, whose choices might be decided by 20% of the electorate. And sometimes these referendums that pass, the vast majority of them are very valid, very good referendum. But there are referendum out there that have no business being on a ballot box. Thank you very much.
We appreciate your comments. Appreciate all the city folks that have come today, 3 or 4 mayors and commissioners. I know a lot of you were standing earlier that didn't take the opportunity to speak, and we appreciate that you're here and are supportive of this. Ladies and gentlemen, the question before us then is whether or not we'll refer this to the lawyer to wordsmith it, and that we will bring it back for further discussion at our public hearings. And so I'm going to place that question before you at this time. And so, Mary, if you'll call the roll on this, please.
Okay.
You need a motion to do that?
These are our general ideas here. It's sort of like a committee bill that now we've got these before us, that we're just going to vote on them one after another and try to determine what's going to public hearing.
Okay. Mr. Ackerman?
No.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Ms. Ferguson? Mr. Glazer? Mr. Grundy?
Yes.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Little? Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Martin? Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin? Yes. Mr. Wood? Yes. Mr. York?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. By your vote, then, 8 votes have sent it on to the public hearing phase. And again, I caution everyone not to read everything into this, because this just means we're going to discuss it and think about it, and votes may change. We've got a long way to go yet. But what that just said is that this commission's willing to think about it some more. This time we'll recognize Mr. Glazer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have the 11 items in front of us, and I think the idea tonight, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is to move forward with the items that we want to go to the public hearing. And being that some of them are what I would consider even redundant or a different angle, I would like to start at question number 5 and move that, replacing the Board of County Commissioners with the Board of Charter Commissioners, move forward as the first of a few items.
If I could recognize Ms. Blakely to put that up, and if you would, she's got some PowerPoints here that will assist us in consideration, since we're going to take them out of order, it looks like.
We taking them out of order?
That one sort of encompasses a lot of things, I think, so it may answer a lot of questions here quickly, I think.
Hard to tell.
This is a manatee.
Ms. Blakely, if you'll just briefly tell us what this does and what this sets us up to do in other amendments, then we can take it up from there.
Question 5 sets up questions 6 through 10. All of these questions address the election of county commissioners, 6 through 10. This series of questions is affectionately known as the Professor and Commissioner Joe Little Compact. The compact was designed to provide stronger legal support for changing to nonpartisan elections of county commissioners, allowing for a cap on the salaries of county commissioners, and imposing a term limit on county commissioners. I have opined that under the Constitution, nonpartisan elections and salary caps are solely within the purview of the state legislature and can't be accomplished by charter amendment. I've also said that the Constitution doesn't allow charter amendments to establish term limits. The compact attempts to address the constitutional issues by replacing the Board of County Commissioners with a Board of Charter Commissioners, in hope that that simple change will provide additional legal support for charter amendments to establish nonpartisan elections, salary caps, and term limits. Question 5 is the first in that series. It replaces the Board of County Commissioners with a Board of Charter Commissioners and allows for further amendments posed in Amendments 6 through 10. The amendment takes effect on the day that the new county commissioners are elected, November 16th, 2010. And that's, in a nutshell, what that provision does, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'd open it up for any debate that anyone wants to make at this point in time.
Mr. Chair. Ms.
Mr.
Blakely, it's your opinion that if the voters voted no on question 5, then there would be no further counting of votes for 6 through 11. In other words, the following votes are contingent upon passing question 5.
Yes and no. They are absolutely question 6 through 10, but the way I've crafted 11, it's a standalone question. So if the voters reject question 5, then whatever they do with 6, 7, 8, and 9, and 10 is void, right?
But then question 11, if we kept that on there, would basically go at it in a slightly different way.
Question 11 goes at the constitutional officers and makes them charter officers, yes.
And the single-member districts, because that is allowed under the law currently. that either needs to be voted on separately, or could it be crafted so that this would answer that question either way?
We do have a standalone single-member district provision. So if you, that can be done by directing the Board of County Commissioners to do that.
Mr. Chairman, point of clarification. It's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, if, for instance, this body approved this particular proposal and it went forward and was approved, that doesn't mean the subsidiary motions that are connected to this
That's
are
right.
passed.
That's
Okay.
right. We're going to vote on each one by themselves.
That's fine.
Yes, sir. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, maybe it's been answered, but I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. A two-part question. If question 5, are you saying that currently the way everything else is written up to 11, the one up to 11, if question 5 did not pass, then the rest of these would be null and void? Is that what, up to 11? Up to 10? Through 10, right?
Well, 6 through 10.
6 through 10.
6 through 10. There are some other amendments that are in the package and that have numbers and are questions, have nothing to do with the Board of County Commissioners, instead relate to citizens' initiative, for example.
You're contingent on passage of 5.
Okay, my question then, because, you know, there may be people, I know myself, there's some issues up here I'm leaning towards of those, and there's some that I'm not. And I haven't made my mind up totally on any of them, but I'm kind of in the middle on some. My concern is that question 5 might be complicated for people, because in other words, I think like nonpartisan, let's just use, I'm not trying to pick one or the other. Let's say nonpartisan. If you were for nonpartisan elections, I think that's fairly clear to people, you know, what a nonpartisan election is, because many of them have voted. People in Gainesville all vote nonpartisan now. So people have a history of doing that, so it wouldn't be very confusing. But the number 5 is some people I've heard of call it radical. I think that's a matter of opinion, but it's certainly a very different than what nobody's ever voted on anything quite like this, if it were to go out there. So my concern is that if you were for nonpartisan, or you were for single, or any of them, it doesn't really matter, but you were really in favor of that, is there a way to word these where even if 5 didn't pass, but the nonpartisan issue passed, that it would, because it's, are you saying that these are not constitutional without 5? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, let me see if I can answer your question. Yes, I think I could draft 6 that says we've got charter commissioners and it does X, and make sure that that's in the question as well, so they could be independent. My only limitation in doing that is to make sure that the question doesn't exceed 75 words, and one of them gets pretty close to that now, and that the ballot summary doesn't exceed 15 words. So that's the only limitation I have.
Because myself, and I'm not trying to complicate things, I think I'm trying to simplify them, but I'm very concerned that there may be people who are for a particular, they may be for one of these and opposed to the other 4, or vice versa. But I would hate to see, because the numbers will come out whether they're counted or not. For instance, let's just say single-member districts. I'll use that example. I would hate to see that it passed by a large majority. If it did, I'm just speculating. And that because 5 didn't pass, then it was no good. So what I'm concerned about is, regardless of how we go on 5, can we potentially word these in such a way, I understand the limitations, so that they could be voted on where if they passed, they were independently done, or is that not possible?
Yeah, that's a good question.
At the same time. In other words, you're voting for the same time,
Let's hear her answer.
without 2
I
different
was going to
commissions.
try to help, not that she needs any help, but we seem not to be picking this up. The reason 5 is there is because we're trying to make some of these things that are currently, by commonly accepted law, not constitutional. In order to be able to affect the county commission, salary, term limits, all this kind of thing, changing them from a constitutional, because we have this constitutional issue with them, into charter commissioners means that theoretically that kind of buttresses our argument that we can now deal with a whole range of issues with those people that we can't do if they're constitutional officers.
I totally understand that, but what I'm saying is, I believe we've had an opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, that, I'll use single-member districts as an example, that in and of itself is constitutional in some form or fashion. It has been done and upheld. Is that not correct?
Well,
That's in the law.
that is in the law, and the way I get there is that the CRC's resolutions of these issues go to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of County Commissioners has to put them on the ballot. And they've got the ability to put single members on the ballot, so that's how I get to that one. So that's probably not a good example. It's these other ones, changing to nonpartisan, capping salaries, and imposing term limits that, standing by themselves, are questionable from a constitutional
I understand that. What I'm talking about is the ones that aren't.
That's the only one.
That's the only one. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I'm looking down this list and I'm for some version of single-member districts, but I'm concerned that 5 may not pass, but that some version of single-member district, is there a way to word what we've been told is constitutional? Is there a way to word it so that if it passed, it would still have standing whether 5 passed or not?
Question 1 deals
That's
with
question 1.
which is just a standalone single.
And we can decide as we go back and reconcile all the questions over the next little bit, whether or not we want to combine them under that one opportunity or leave 2 opportunities that may be confusing to the voters. But we need to do that. But basically, this number 5 is based on the Florida Constitution, where it says, except when otherwise provided by the county charter, the governing body of each county shall be the Board of County Commissioners. And what we're saying in this charter, we're saying they're not the governing body if this amendment should go forward and pass and so forth. That's where it's all based around. All right.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, but I just want to make sure, because I think maybe I'm not explaining myself correctly. Let me try it one more time. I'm not asking for 2 separate single-member district issues on the ballot at the same time.
Right.
I'm asking, is it possible to put one on there that if 5 passed and it passed would be in, or if it passed and 5 did not, it would still be in? That's what I'm asking.
I understand.
I'm not asking for 2 separate ones. I realize there are several different proposals.
We'll let her think about that some.
That's all I'm asking.
I don't know if you're.
Question 1 does that. Question 1 is a standalone, single-member district.
Right.
So,
Well, you could pull it
So
out.
you
as
could-
Mr. Chair.
question 5. I mean, so
And you can
it wouldn't
pull out
be in-
question 7 or whichever one it
It
is.
is.
right.
That's a good point.
Buddy,
Okay.
can we call the question?
Yes, sir. I think we're ready to. Has everybody
Actually,
had to say what they need to say, or we'll actually see if there's a motion and a thing?
I want to say something on this.
Very quickly. Yes, sir.
My problem with this actual thing is state statute says in order to replace this, the Board of County Commissioners, you actually have to abolish the Board of County Commissioners. You can't just say we're going to change the name and not change. You got to change the duties. You got to change the responsibilities. That's completely abolishing. All we're doing is basically doing a name change. And if we want to do a name change and keep the same duties and responsibilities, then we're not abolishing the county commission. So I guess what my question would be to our attorney is, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're just basically doing a name change, because in order to abolish them, you have to completely abolish them, abolish all duties and responsibilities. Correct, Ms. Blakely?
If you'll notice, the question uses the word replace. This does not use the term abolish. There is a constitutional requirement for constitutional officers. If you want to change and go to nonpartisan, for example, you do have to abolish them. But in this case, we are merely replacing the current Board of County Commissioners with the Board of Charter Commissioners. They have the exact same duties.
Okay, but then we're playing with semantics with words. Replace or abolish. We're playing semantics with words with the word replace. We're basically, again, doing a name change. In order to get rid of or replace the Board of County Commissioners, to call it Charter Review Commissioners, that's in essence abolishing or trying to get rid of what the name is of county commissioners and what they are in essence of their duties and responsibilities as it stands now within the charter and state statute. We're playing semantics with words.
You want me to respond?
Please.
Playing semantics, why isn't replacement as good as?
All right. Let's see if we can wrap this question up. We got a ways to go. We're at after 8 o'clock already here. Go ahead.
Well, again, we're trying to provide additional legal support for at least these 3 other issues that you all want to put on the ballot. And that's an important distinction.
Mr. Chair. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Martin.
Go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Ferguson hadn't spoken tonight. We'll let her speak. That's a telephone going off. I think it gets into the system here.
Mr. Chair, one of my concerns is our process and how we're coming to decisions about what issues will move forward. And maybe it's just me, but I don't feel like we have gathered as much information as we should have about some of these issues, especially when I look at single-member district. I've heard citizens said, I heard some of our members said they think that what we're proposing may violate the Voting Rights Act, it may disenfranchise voters, but we have not taken the time to maybe gather more information to determine whether those statements are in fact true or false. And one of the things I think that maybe we should have done, which we still can do, is maybe get a presentation from staff or from someone at the university to gather as much information as we can. At least that's what I would like to see, so that whatever decision we make, we do have as much information that we can gather to do that. And I think that's a missing link in terms of what we've done so far. I mean, we've heard really passionate comments from this body and from citizens, but just in terms of facts and figures, I don't think we've done that. I don't think that information has been presented yet.
I appreciate that comment. I know personally I sat down and read the Voter Rights Act to make sure I understood what it said, and so we can certainly in the public hearings bring some of that forward. Can do that if this question even moves forward. Right now, we're trying to use our time as wisely as we can and not waste staff time or anybody on things that aren't going to go forward. But I appreciate very much your comments, and we want to make sure you've got the information you need before we make a final decision in June. Any further questions or comments on this question before we take a vote on that? We'll recognize you, Mr. Jennings. Mm-hmm. What is the question? I'm recognizing Mr. Jennings right now. If you'd like to speak, Ms. Chestnut, we'll recognize you next. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. We've been here 2.5 hours ourselves, concentrating pretty hard, I can tell you. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ed Jennings again for the record. And I've said what I said before on behalf of the 4As. Now I'm speaking really just as an individual. I hope each of you, and I'm sure you do, but just want to reiterate the point, that you take the gravity of this decision very, very seriously. That whether you say replace or abolish, changing the form of government that is in Alachua County is not a oh well issue. We can debate single-member districting, we can debate partisanship elections, we can debate those issues, and we all may come differently on that. But this is a significant change in the history of this county that you're going to change this form of government, and that if you are that serious, I really lean to, and I guess they always say those who have not spoken as much, unlike us politicians, speak wisdom. Ms. Ferguson just talked about getting some more information. That before you go down this road of making this humongous step, either I would say if you've got to make the step tonight, then I don't think you've taken the due process to get there. I would say no. But if you are still trying to figure out, you're going through a process because you want to do a couple of things that at least have been opined by your attorney, and potentially there's a little that you can't do. The only one that you can do is nonpartisan. You're saying that can be a decision that can be made outside of this process. But you feel
single-member district.
I'm sorry, single-member districting. I apologize. It can be done outside this process. But have you heard enough testimony and have enough belief individually and passionate enough about this issue to change the form of government such that you can have nonpartisan elections and the two or three other, I don't have them in front of me, the two or three other issues that you can't do legally? Have you gotten that much testimony, done that much research, and are there clamors from the hinterlands in Alachua County that we change the form of government to make that happen? So I just asked that question as a comment before you. I haven't been in the 10 other meetings you have. I appreciate your service, but I would ask that you not make this significant change until you get a lot more information. This is a big change in the history of this county, and I hope that you
We're
won't
not
go
going
down
to
the
make
road.
any change tonight. Only thing we're doing tonight is say we want to go to the next phase where we'll listen to more people and
And I guess,
gather more
Mr.
information.
And I guess, Mr. Chairman, I understand that the process, as I understand it, is that there will be a public hearing process.
3 of them,
That,
that's
that,
right.
that will go through that effort. But to make to put this out there, such that you want to me, I would have hoped that maybe more of that discussion and information would have been gathered prior to now. That's just one opinion, Mr. Chairman, that you all would have gotten down that far. And so I hope that you don't, and if you're not that serious about that as individual voters, that you just take this off the table at this point.
I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
saying that, and I'm sure you recognize that all of us up here have been thinking about this for about 6 or 7 months now and,
Yes, sir.
and working on it, and appreciate your comments very much, though. Mr. Chestnut.
Got lost because I didn't know whether I should have come up here earlier or whether this, but since we're down to the single-member district thing, I would, and I understand you've heard all kind of good little things and all kinds of thoughts and prayers, hopes and wishes about this. I've somehow got involved in politics about 23 years ago. They didn't have single-member districts then. You went out in the county and you talked to citizens, and you worked hard to try to get elected. I hear all this talk about these small municipalities and everybody else running around. Ed Simmons I served with on the school board, and he was from Archer. Bobby Summers was from High Springs. I served on the county commission with him. Chuck Clemens was from out in the county, and Sid Martin, of course, was who a mainstay here, was from Hawthorne. I'm getting kind of lost on that. I take a look back at the city of Gainesville. Neil Butler got elected to the city commission. Well, no single-member districts then. Aaron Green followed him on the city commission, and Cynthia Moore Chestnut. Wasn't no single-member districts then. So I'm getting kind of confused about the county, and that's what kind of disturbs me a little bit, because within Alachua County, every municipality has a city commission. Now, these people got to run in their own city limits and get elected. Now, I can't understand why if they want to run for the county commission, that would represent High Springs, that would represent Alachua, every other municipality out here, if they had somebody who was an elected official, who had experience, had a background in serving the public. Why they can't run for the county commission? Why do we have to carve that out? One of the most detrimental things that I have seen to happen in this county, and it affected the city of Gainesville when it went to some single-member districts. John, I'm going to have to come home and bring Daddy up now a little. When he was out there campaigning on the county commission, he was in every black church in this county looking for votes. On the city commission, believe me, you did not run from the city commission in Gainesville unless you went out into the African American churches. Now, on the single-member districts,
Doesn't have.
don't see it. Don't see it, not one bit. So now, how do you make citizens of a particular religious faith to start with? Because the black church has kind of always been open to all politicians. Whereas that I never, in my 23 years, I've never been, probably 2 white churches I've ever been invited to during election season. But everybody kept running into black churches during that period. Now you don't see anybody that's non-African American in a black church on the east side of town during city commission elections. So how is one supposed to feel that just because you come from a single-member district that you represent all the people in the community, when in fact you don't even know what their concerns or their issues may be? And that's what I'm afraid about. Because just like I see and have seen cities and municipalities violate the Boundary Adjustment Act by creating these enclaves and not giving service to them, that the county has to pick up the responsibility of trying to provide fire service for them, trying to do other things. Boundary Adjustment Act says, yes, as a municipality, you can annex the land if you want to, but you have to, within a certain period of time, provide the services, water, sewer, whatever it is that you are providing for your municipality, and you annex this property, you've got to extend it out there. And this is not happening when these cities jump up, and annex the land in, but then don't want to provide the services to it. We see it all going all over the county when it comes to fire service, when it comes to fire rescue services. All these little issues keep popping up. So my thing is that I think we need to think internally when it comes to single member district. Is it, in fact, the best thing? If you want to serve the public, then you've got to convince the public to serve you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Mr. Chestnut. Further comments on the question before us, though? Mr. Grundy, Governor. Go ahead, Mr.
Oh, he can go.
Okay. Yes, sir. Do you want to speak briefly here?
You just got to say it. That's what you just got to tell. What you just got to try to tell you. Walter Willard, Game Pioneer Developer ICE. Where's Mr. Weed? Was Mr. Weed part of this commission?
No, sir. That was the city.
The city?
Yes, right.
Okay.
She used to be a county commissioner.
I hope we don't abolish the county commissioners, because I don't know who we expecting of Mr. Little. Is he's a special magistrate or something, such as the smaller municipality of Alachua have, doing much better than we doing with all our commissioners? What can we do? We can't do nothing. I think they're going to move the capital to Alachua. They banned it. They replaced their Board of Adjustment. They got a special magistrate. Banned it, abolished it, replaced it. It's got the same person. Well, what does it matter? Got the same effect. I don't know who we're going to expect to go be voting. Some students, adjunct students. I tell you, half of the adjunct students that was at the last election couldn't find IDs. Now, without county commissioners, who's going to decide who have to have ID and who don't? Charter commissioners going to decide that. Besides, I don't know how many charter commissioners is it supposed to be. Supposed to be 5 of them too? I see we got some commissioners back here. I see we got the old Blue Ribbon Committee members up here too. Mr. Stringfellow, Mr. Brinkman. We would never pass no junk like this, huh? Never. Never will. And as we stand in the committee, never shall be.
All right.
As I said, the city of Alachua has a magistrate that's hearing everything. They don't have no Board of Adjustment. They don't have no planning board. Special magistrate. They don't have to worry about no DRIs and all that stuff. Now they're taking all the business away from us. All of it. I don't want to see you sit up there and give the county commissions power to challenge the sheriff, to turn the sheriff's job into a charter job again. I don't want to see that again. I don't want to see that again.
Thank you, Mr. Willard. Appreciate your comments. All right. Further comments on this, Mr. Grundy?
All right, I don't know if this is on, Mr. Chair. One thing that I'm truly concerned about, and I think I've made my comments clear last time, and I want to reiterate them again for the record, was why do we want to give our citizens the right to vote for all 5 of their county commissioners, to give them the right to vote for one? I say that again. That's first. Secondly, I also want to say this. To me, I want to ask a few questions, and I think questions are a good thing. We all know pretty much who's led it. For example, the 4As came before us, and they talked about having a superintendent issue. But it seems like I want to ask a question is, what's really behind it? It's not a few disgruntled citizens, because tonight I heard the chairman of the REC come before us and say he was for something, but he didn't want to clarify which one it was. But I got phone calls and everything from this gentleman for being for single-member districts. So I think it's clear as, as the 2 shoes I have on my feet, what he's for. I just have a real problem. There wasn't a real issue in this county until there were 2 commissioners of color on this commission, before there was really issues of wanting to have single-member districts. And I'm not turning this into, because a person of both dynamics of color, both Hispanic and African American, I really have a problem with saying I'm going to protect Cynthia Moore Chestnut because I'm on the Charter Review Commission. Cynthia Moore Chestnut never needed little commissioner member, Charter Review member Armando Grundy to defend her. Rodney Long never needed anyone to, doesn't need me to defend him to run countywide. So I find it absolutely interesting that we want to bring up single member districts and what we want Hale Plantation to have a district. We want the east side of Gainesville to have its own little district. I mean, once again, although we're not going to be drawing boundaries, in order to get that kind of equitable representation, like I said, we're going to have to base it on geography. We're going to have to gerrymander Alachua County. So then I'll say this to Mr. Jones. We don't like it when Kareem Brown's district is gerrymandered, but we want to bring gerrymandering to Alachua County. And I have a major problem with that. And I think any citizen in this county is going to have a issue with gerrymandering Alachua County. So I don't want this board to say we want our citizens to give up the right to vote for 5 county commissioners to vote for 1, and I don't want us to put on a ballot to gerrymander Alachua County. And I'll close with that.
The question before us opens the door to those other questions, but we haven't gotten there quite yet. What this question does, it's under the Constitution where it says, except as otherwise provided by the county charter, the governing board of the county shall be the county commissioners. The question before us is whether or not we want to send forward, do we want to maintain the status quo, meaning the county commission will remain the governing board, or do we want to go to a different charter commission? That's the only thing that's before us right at this second. We're going to take up the other questions as we go along. If this one passes, otherwise it may change a lot of things because then that door won't be open. So that's. Am I explaining that correctly, Ms. Blakely? Okay. All right. Mr. Martin, John Martin.
I'll keep it very brief, Mr. Chair. I think that really, and I think that's what people are saying, what they're saying is that this number 5, if you're the primary reason I think to be for it is to incorporate all these other issues, whether you're for the individual issues or not, that the discussion of the individual issues is important, because if we weren't trying to do these other few, the number 5 by itself would probably be,
You don't need it.
be useless in a sense. So to me, having a mixing up and with number 5 is okay. I just want to say that as it stands right now, I'm going to vote at this moment to allow this to move forward when the time comes. But that does not mean, and I ask you to stay tuned and don't make judgments, that I'm going to support it in the end, because I still, like others, I want to see some more information. I want to, because me personally, and I won't get into it because I know we're running out of time, I personally would rather see us have like 3 single-member districts and 5 at large. If you were asking me personally, that's what I would want, because my whole motivation is not to preclude it. Mr. Chestnut said what he said, and I agree. I tagged along with Big Sid in most of those churches, and I've been to every one of those myself multiple times. So absolutely, that is not my intent. So and there may be others, I agree, that have other motives for doing it. But I just want to clarify that my intent for looking at some form of single-member districts really only has to do with overall some type of more rural representation. It is not based on any party. It is not based on any race. I'm still struggling with this myself, but I know because I speak out, I'm also get thrown back at, and that's part of the challenges we have. But I'm going to vote for this now to move it forward, but I'm not sure how I'm going to vote in the end. Thank you.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I'd like to just
Wood.
address this, and I just want to address question 5. I'm not going to muddy the waters with any of the other issues that may fall behind this. But I totally agree with what was said earlier. This was drafted by one of the commissioners who is an attorney on our board here, and this is a significant change in the way we do business in the county. We've already heard from one of our members who said they don't feel that they're ready to understand enough about this to be able to move forward unless we hear from a lot of other people who are authorities on this. quite frankly, how do we expect the voters in Alachua County to approve or even be knowledgeable of this if we don't have enough people here that are ready to vote on it? Because to me, once again, what was said, this is such a significant change in the way we do business, and why are we approving something? Do we feel that the county commissioners are not good? Do we feel that the way government is done here should be thrown out? And, you know, my whole concern is, I just don't think that this is what we should be doing to do other things within the county, and that is to replace and move to a charter commission.
Appreciate those comments.
But, Mr. Chair,
Very briefly.
in all fairness, I mean, if you're going to, and I applaud anybody making those statements, but if you're, I mean, I could read you what my motivation is very clearly. And I'm going to tell you right now, my motivation for considering any of these is because of the movement, and I'm not supporting any one particular movement. I'm not a coffee party. I'm not a tea party. I'm a Democrat. I've been a Democrat my whole life. I'm just telling you like it is. But I can see the writing on the wall that there are over 30% of our citizens here. If you look at the new voter rolls, and I've looked into this, they're constantly going no party. National elections are being decided not by the Republicans and the Democrats, but by the majority by independents. They'll tell you that if you listen to any of them, even the people who are successful. The last three presidential candidates will tell you that won elections, that if the independents had not swung their way, they would not have won, including the current one. Okay, so, but listen here, you had the floor, let me hear. So the reason I'm looking at supporting this, and is because I think that we need Alachua County has always been a visionary county. And I honestly believe that we should at least think about having the courage to do something. If you want to call it radical, different. I'm not focused on the current county commissioners, and there may not be problems, but I want to know how we're going to keep up, because the voters are actually getting ahead of this. And I will tell you that right now, if they don't want this, they're not going to pass it. What are we so afraid of that we're not willing, that we're so wanting to cling to power, or what it is that we're not willing to put forth some new ideas, be they from the right, the left, or somewhere in the middle? Me personally, you know, someone stood up earlier tonight and talked about the parties and all. I just want to say for me, and this probably sounds radical in itself, I'm a Democrat, but I'll tell you right now, and you can look at my record, I'm very fiscally conservative, but I'm very socially liberal. I really don't care what you do behind your closed doors of your home. And what I think a lot of people, I don't even have, neither one of the parties really addresses where I'm at right now, to be honest with you, and none of these movements do. You know, I'm looking at how do we empower those people? If for instance, I'll give you one, and I promise I'll be quiet, but I feel passionate about this. And thank God for that. You should have passion in your life or it ain't worth living. The state passed a rule that said that primaries were going to, and I'm not a lawyer, but basically, in my opinion, their intent was to open up primaries to have it where people, whether regardless of party, could vote. And both parties, Democrat and Republican, have found a loophole in that law, and I'm not talking about any race in Alachua County. I'm talking about statewide, and they have usurped that. And what has happened is we are having a larger and larger segment of our population. They're telling us they're not interested in Democrats. They're not interested in Republicans. They're telling us that every day. But we as parties, whether you're Republican or Democrat, are so scared that we're going to lose power that we'll do anything to hold on to it. And all I'm trying to do is open that process up. It's not, for me, it ain't about race. It's not about any of that. You know? So I had to get that out, and I'll try to be quiet, but
Well,
that is how I feel.
Very briefly, because this is the brief side over here. What I would like to say is there's nothing here that tells me it will improve county government at all. Not one thing has been proven that any of these things that are proposed will improve county government. These are changes for the sake of changes. And I don't see that it's going to increase the voter rolls. Nonpartisanship will not increase the voter turnout. Single-member districts are not going to elect people from Hawthorne and Evanston and High Springs. They're not.
I'm not running for or from anything.
You know, what I'm saying
Mr.
here
Wood, let Mr. Wood
is a radical change that simply hasn't been tested, and it's scary to look at.
Okay. All right.
My only concern, Mr. Chair, is people have been saying different things about what other people's motives are. And I just want my motives to be clear.
I can say from my own standpoint, the only context I've had for rural concerns, no other concerns. Mr. Brinkman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Commissioner Wood. There is really no need for this, except for some people are trying to advantage specific political ideologies. Because frankly, I've talked to people from mule communities who do not feel unrepresented by this county commission. They feel very represented. It's people who have a specific political persuasion. They don't like the fact of frankly, the fact that we have 5 Democratic county commissioners, and they're trying to change that. And the way to change that is by competing in elections and winning a majority vote of the entire county electorate.
Joe
Well,
Little.
I just say that I think there is some kind of specific interest group that would merit bias. That's why I'm afraid of it.
Let me recognize Joe Little.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This number 5 has been attributed to me, and indeed I did draft the language. But let me say 2 things. I came onto this commission not seeing that we really needed to do anything to the charter of Alachua County, and I may be at that position when we get to the 3rd hearing. I may vote no on everything because I think everything's okay. I don't know, you say. I don't have a strong feeling about anything. But let me tell you about what we have before us. Very early in this commission's hearings, we had very strong opinions expressed within the public, but especially within the commission itself, that we want to have term limits, that we want to have salary caps, and that we want to have nonpartisan elections. And we heard a great deal of support as well as opposition to that from the public today. So there's a lot of interest in those matters in the community. Our lawyer told us, and I agree with her, and I understand that because I'm a lawyer and have some opinions that are legal opinions on this, that some of you look at that disfavorably, but that's okay. That's all right for you to act that way. I agreed with her, and then I also saw that there was great sentiment in this commission to do some things. And so I thought that we could do it this way, by creating the charter commission instead of the county commission. Our lawyer doesn't necessarily agree with that. She understands that there is, I think, a real, unlike the thing we debated so long earlier, there is a legitimate question here, and that, in that view, I think we can go forward. So the purpose of doing this, if there is one, that is voting to send this forward, is to let us decide whether we want to put on the ballot term limits, nonpartisan elections, and salary caps. If you don't want to do any of those things, you vote no. If you do want to accept the recommendation that a number of our speakers have, let's let the voters decide these questions, then you should vote yes. And in terms of radical, there's nothing radical here. Everything that we have here has been done somewhere else in our state, and they haven't gone communist. They haven't become Hitlers, you see. So this is a process, and I think the question is: do we want now to continue, or do we simply want to abandon what we've done for the last 6 or 8 months? And I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. I know how I'm going to vote, but again, if we say no, that's okay with me.
Appreciate that very much, Mr. Little. I think all of us have said several times that we've got a long way to go yet, and none of us really know how we're going to vote at the last meeting yet. And so I can assure you I'm there. And so, Mr. Martin.
Commissioner Little said something that piqued my curiosity. We had a number of legal opinions on some of these proposals. Did I miss something? Did we get a legal opinion on this particular proposal? No. We didn't. All right. Well, in the vein of, I got to echo what Commissioner Ferguson said. We're doing a lot of voting here without a whole lot of information here. And we did retain our attorney to do something, and she's been working pretty hard on that, but that seemed kind of odd. This is a big thing in which a lot of things are going to log roll because of it.
Well, if this passes, we're going to ask her to opine on that before the next
You
thing.
have given us a legal opinion which basically said this would be potentially unconstitutional.
Yes.
And Professor Little disagrees with you and has drafted something that he thinks would address some of your constitutional concerns. Isn't that right?
Yes and no, no and yes. It's a tough question to answer.
Another attorney.
I did give a legal opinion individually on nonpartisan, salary caps, and term limits. I have not given an opinion on if you replace the Board of County Commissioners with charter commissioners, what is the effect of that? So
If this
And
gets
that
8
is an
votes
attempt-
tonight, we'll try to do that.
Excuse me, and that is attempted to kind of
that's
position these in a way that would potentially pass constitutional muster.
That's absolutely the intent behind, as I understand it, this question 5, and that is to bolster the legal view that you can do any and all of those 3 things.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Unless a citizen wishes to speak on this, we're ready to vote. I'm not seeing any. The question before you then is question number 5, whether or not we'll forward that on to the public hearings, and with that, we'll, if that passes, then we'll give some directions to our attorney. This is question 5, which is replacing the Board of County Commissioners with a Board of Charter Commissioners. Call the roll.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
No.
Dr. Little?
Mr. Little? Yes.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson?
No.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
And Mr. Ackerman?
Yes, for now.
Okay. With 9 of your votes then, am I correct in that? With 9 of your votes, we have passed that on to the next phase. Thank you very much. The next question then before us, and again, these are contingent upon the passage of number 5 as they're now written, is whether or not we would consider moving forward a 7-member Board of County Commissioners, 5 which would be elected from districts and 2 elected county-wide. That would be our next question before us. So do you want to talk about that at all, Sarah?
Not really. I mean, it does set up a transitional way to do it and has a chair and a vice chair, both of which are elected countywide.
The next 2, this question and the next question, are the single-member district questions, and should they fail, then it would fall back just 5 at large, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any members that wish to comment further on single members? John Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said earlier, I've never really been for, and I don't know how I'm going to vote if it ends up coming down this way, for totally 5 single-member districts. My whole idea from the beginning is to have some type of mix of at-large and single-member districts, like the city of Gainesville has. Whether or not it needs to be 7 versus 5, I think might be because of population was the reason why it was talking about 7. But, we've had a lot of people come up before us tonight, and I applaud them. I really applaud people coming forward because it's good that we have this. We must be doing something right or wrong to get this interest. But, if you look at it, all these proposals, all they're asking for is to basically go with what the city of Gainesville has been doing, and Mayor Hanrahan gave a little bit of odds and ends about it. Personally, it's on my own opinion. She seemed to be more in favor of it than odds, but that's just my opinion. That I personally would like to see. I'm not sure about 7 members, but is it possible? Could I ask the question of why was it 7? Is it totally because of that'd be the only way to do it from a voter perspective?
That's what the proposal was.
No, I'm just asking.
It was 7 because that was what y'all voted to do.
I think as charter commissioners, we could set it whatever we wanted. Am I
Yes,
correct?
you could set it
Since
at
we've
20.
left the county commissioners, if they're under this part of the proposal, under the county commissioner, you've only got 2 choices, 5 or 7. Am I correct
Correct.
in that? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you very
But
much.
if you go to a charter commissioners, you could have 1.
Is there any, is there,
Unintended consequence.
well, the people still have to vote.
Mayor.
Is there any reason why it needs to be from the Voter Rights Act, those types of things, why it would need to be 5 or 7, or does that matter?
I don't think that matters as long as you have one person, one vote. I think that you could draw the lines perhaps to do this. I guess if you go to single-member districts, the advantage of this one over the 5 members is that each person could vote for 3 commissioners instead of 1 commissioner.
Because like I said, I've really looked at this over the years, and I think we would be served if we had a similar situation to the city of Gainesville, and I don't see a lot of people standing up. I hope that if a lot of people are opposed to this, if they live in Gainesville, that they will go before the City Commission of Gainesville and ask them to overturn parts of their charter that deal with this. You know, and the one thing I heard about single-member districts was that it was in fact used in Gainesville to try to increase the likelihood that minority would be on the city commission. So I hadn't heard them use that as a reason not to put it on there. So to me, I'm more in favor of this particular proposal where it has a mixture of at-large and single-member districts. That would be my preference if we could move that.
Mr. Brinkman.
As I think everyone knows, do not support single-member districts for the county. One of the defects I see, among many, was brought up by Mayor Hanrahan, and that is no resident of the county would be able to vote for a majority of the county commission under either of these proposals. Even under the 7-member, you'd vote for a district and 2 at large, and that would only be 3. And frankly, I think that's one of the huge problems with it. I see no advantage to having people just vote for their district commissioner. I mean, you know, under the 5 at-large, the 5 single-member district proposal. To me, that, if anything, I think that will actually decrease voter turnout because people will very quickly find that they have a voice on the county commission with exactly 1 vote, and that 1 vote can accomplish absolutely nothing.
Is the city 4 and 3, or is it 5 and 2? 4 and 3? 4 and 3. Okay. Including the mayor, right. Okay. Thank you. I mean, we can always, motion could change this proposal. Let's point that out. Mr. Glazer.
And I would like to address that. Last time we had the Charter Review Commission, we had discussed, and again, it got a lot later in the process than we are now, in hearing both sides of the issue in regards to single-member districts and trying to come up with a plan that addresses all the concerns, i.e. being able to vote for a majority of the commissioners versus just single-member districts on an individual basis. There is a hybrid system that exists, and I would like to float it tonight as a potential compromise to bring both sides actually together. I have drafted some simple language to try to walk it through. It's actually a very simple system. It's each district commissioner shall be elected by 2 independent nonpartisan votes. First would be a primary vote of the district voters only, with the top 2 candidates moving to the general election. The second vote would be a general election where county-wide voter participation would take place, and the candidate receiving the most votes would be declared the winner. In the event there are only 2 candidates who qualify for the race, the vote would then just go to the general election, which would be held county-wide. And this enables individuals to run in a district format, which would keep campaign costs down, would allow that campaigning to be at a localized level, that would allow potential commissioners to connect with the district voters first and hear and share their concerns. However, allowing for a countywide vote that would enable every citizen to be able to elect all 5 commissioners. As we heard a lot of testimony tonight, and I know a lot of the folks in the room as well, and find myself somewhat conflicted, because I think our primary role, to be quite candid, And there are issues that I'm going to put on the ballot that I'm going to vote against at the ballot box, quite candidly, is to make sure that they have legal standing and that they rise to the level that the citizens want to vote on them. And we have gotten so much more participation from this Charter Review Commission than in the history. In fact, it eclipses any other participation. We have never had this kind of outpouring of public participation, the numbers of individuals who actually applied for the Charter Review Commission. And as I travel around, these issues continuously surface as something that the public wants to vote on. And quite honestly, many of the issues are not as, you don't have to be as informed if you're for or against a biomass plant as if you are for or against nonpartisan elections. People pretty much know if they're for that or against it. And so the issues that are really on the table are not that confusing and really not that complicated. And what I think we should be doing as a body is trying to bring together all of our ideas and putting them before the voters as the best case possible for us to do. And I know there's, we all come from different walks of life and have had different experiences to get us to a point where we're for or against something. But the reality is, many of these issues rise to the level that the public should have input, and input at the ballot box, and let them decide. And so, what I think on this issue, which is contentious, and I would hate to see us as a board or as a commission, and I would hate to see the community divisive on it. There's a lot of views on these issues, but I think there are opportunities for us to bring them together to make the best plan. And so in regards to the single-member districts, I think it should remain at 5. You have a lot of costs associated with more commissioners and more space and more staff and more everything. And I'm not sure that's the direction at this time that this community wants. And I don't think that's the best plan to put before the citizens for them to decide. So I think we should have a 5-member commission, county commission, and I think that we should have 2 votes. One that's district, that's your initial vote. Top 2 vote getters then go to the county-wide vote. And I just think that that is a system that would be embraced by the citizens and really drive to the heart of a lot of the concerns that we've had shared before us, meeting after meeting after meeting. And so I move that to be moved forward as an amendment to 6 or 7, however you want to look at it, for the language to be drafted and for us to see if, in fact, that is not a better system. There is one other amendment that I would like to make.
Let's see if we can,
Okay.
if anybody wants to second what you just proposed, which is pretty complex to wrap my head around it right now. Okay, we've got a motion and a second that,
What would we do about 6, though, Brady?
6 would be voted down.
6, I think he's offering an amendment to strike 6 and replacing it with this, is what he's saying.
Actually, wouldn't it be? So that's 7. So the motion is to replace 6.
Replace 6 with a 5-member commission that would be voted on a bifurcated system of single-member districts in the primary. The top 2 candidates, if there are more than one candidate, would then go to the general election to be voted on countywide. Am I correct?
That is correct. It's that simple.
So actually, this would take the place of 6 and 7, correct?
In the end, that would be the effect.
Do away with the 7-member.
Do away with the 7-member and something, Mr. Little.
Mr. Chairman, the pesky Florida Constitution comes into play again here. Article 6, Section 1 says elections shall be regulated by law. Law is an act of the Florida legislature. So the elections in this state are regulated by the legislature. And so you're trying to do something, again, outside of the Constitution, which may be a good thing, but the only problem is the Constitution gets in the way. And so that's all I say. I'm not going to support this because I think it's inconsistent with the Constitution, and we can debate it forever if we wish to. But
My understanding is that the legislature sets up the way the elections work, but I don't know if Ms. Blakely wants to talk about this or not. If any other member wants to talk about it, we got a motion and a second. That's right. Okay, all right. But if all right, if it passes, then we'll talk about it some more. Does Mr. Brinkman?
Thank you,
and
Mr.
then I'll
Chair.
raise it, Ms. Ferguson.
As I recall, single-member districts are consistent with the Florida Constitution, and question 1 speaks to 5 single-member districts. So I would respectfully suggest that your amendment might actually be more appropriate to amend to question 1. I appreciate your effort at trying to come up with a compromise. I'd like to support it, but there's, to me, a significant defect, and that is much like the people who spoke against the closed primary that occurs, and it's actually one of the big reasons that people support nonpartisan elections. The same thing is basically happening here. A person would be placed on the ballot from a district that I don't live in, and I would not have the ability, any ability to control who it was that made that ballot. Whereas currently, with the primary election being county-wide, I have that ability to control, to have a say in who makes it to the general election ballot. Under this proposal, only the residents of a district, they will choose who the rest of us will have to choose from. And,
All right.
and I'm sorry, but that's basically the reason I
I'll go to Ms. Ferguson. She was next.
Mr. Chair, I guess I'm thinking again, what problem are we trying to solve with changing the current structure of what we have now to something else? And that something else right now is single-member districting. From the comments that I've heard from some members of this body and from the public, it appears that the issue is more representation from the rural communities. I can empathize with that, but the major problem with that is that there seems to be an interest in totally dismantling what currently exists to move towards something that probably is not going to net us what individuals would like, because of how the county would have to be carved up to make that happen. And I don't see that it's going to happen. Me, as one commissioner on this body, there has to be a greater likelihood that there is going to be a greater benefit to move from what we currently have to something so arbitrary that it is not going to get us or get the results that individual would like to see. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening because of how the county is made up and where the population is, and 49% of the population is in Gainesville, or the urban area of Gainesville. Everything else is spread out, certainly. But I still believe that if we move forward with this, what's going to happen is you will still have the majority of the county commission being voted from Gainesville. And then what? And I don't have a problem with change, but I think in terms of moving toward change, there has to be a greater likelihood that we're going to have something better. And I don't see that happening. Thank you,
for
Mr.
your
Chair.
comments. Good comments. Further, let me go this way. I hadn't been over. Mr. Tuttle.
This is really about representation. And there were people, it was the hottest item today, 25 people spoke up in favor of nonpartisan, more than anything else that came up. 24 people spoke up in favor of single-member districts. Whether people want to believe it or not, the word disenfranchised has commonly been used, that there are many people, 48%, who cannot vote in the Democratic primary. 48%. From all the history online from the supervisor of elections, The decision of the next county commissioner was made at the Democratic primary. I think anyone who says this is being done by Republicans to elect Republicans hasn't spent much time understanding the makeup. 52% should easily be able to win an election, and gee, they still have almost 25% of the undecided vote, which, as somebody pointed out, is growing over and over and over. Anyone that followed what happened in Massachusetts, it came from exactly that. That is a state that has not elected a Republican senator in probably the lifetime of most of the people here. The independents did it. They don't get a chance to vote. Almost 25% of the people are registered as other than Republican or Democrat. They don't get a chance to vote because it happens at the Democratic primary. I'll be happy to give you examples of why people feel they are not being represented. I happen to live in the unincorporated area. We just went in and petitioned the county to raise our property taxes. The reason we're establishing a special assessment district. The reason we did that is because our roads are in terrible shape. We put a petition into the county to have them done. The county said, we don't have any money. So we're sitting here now watching our neighborhood decline, our property values decline, not feeling good about the property. We worked with the county commission and with Public Works and came up with a special assessment district. We are now taking a hit for the next 10 years. And by the way, of the 239 homes, all but one district, which was 12. So 227 homes opted to do this. That's the only way we can get our roads done. Now, why is that the only way we can get our roads done? Because people don't spend much time thinking about 41.7% of the population that live in the unincorporated district. 41.7%. We can do all kinds of things which can be addressed by private money, whether it's choices or spaying kitty cats or homeless or anything you want to name. Nobody else is going to take care of those roads. Do I have a problem? No, mine are getting taken care of. We have one more hearing to go. It's going to happen. But there are a lot of people out there that say, hey, wait a minute. We don't have a vote that counts anywhere, and nobody's paying attention to us. And there are two petitions here that are meant to direct that. How we elect people, i.e., who gets to cast a meaningful ballot, and how we make sure that somebody responds to particular areas that right now are not getting well responded to.
Mr. Grundy.
When the process isn't working for you, you tend to want to change the process. So the wheel hasn't been broken for I don't know how many years now, but now all of a sudden we want to change the process and reinvent the wheel. There's no problem with the electoral process in Alachua County. The residents have been very clear about that. I mean, I have a problem with saying, I think you live right down the road from me. And, I mean, right on the other side of the street is the county for me. So I'm not going to say that I live in the county because I don't. I'm a city resident. But at the same token, to say that none of the county commissioners are accountable or, I mean, everybody has their hot button issues. I mean, if it's the roads, I came before them, I don't know how many times, and said, it's not just your roads in your neighborhood. We have a $300 million road deficit that I remember a few years ago, there was a special assessment of taxes that our citizens didn't want to approve, that voted it down. And you want to talk about increasing taxes nowadays, that's a recipe for disaster. Nobody's going to want to talk about increasing their taxes. The school board just increased taxes recently, and you hear people already upset about their taxes went up. I mean, so we have a $300 million deficit within our roads in our county that needs to be improved. It's not just one neighborhood, with all due respect. Secondly, I have a problem with someone wanting to take away my right to vote for all 5 county commissioners who are accountable to everyone. It is really simple arithmetic. It isn't, I'm not going to get into a quagmire. It's simple. It really is simple. The Commissioner Byerly, of all people, who is the direct opposite of me politically in every word of the spectrum, I can call him, and he calls me back. If I have an issue or a problem that I want to address with him, he doesn't say because I live in the city of Micanopy, the municipality, I can't help you. But I don't know if I, like we have a single member district, it's going to be of haves and have-nots. Because I live in High Springs, I'm not going to address your concern. But guess what? I get to vote on something. If it's Evanston or, I don't want you to be incorporated, or I want to affect you, I get to vote on your issue and it affects you. So it is a double-edged sword. And I actually have a problem saying that we're not being represented by our current county commission because they live, Commissioner Long lives in Monteoka. He responds to anybody. So I think it's a double-edged sword. We may get what we want, but the unintended consequences is something that I'm not willing to accept. And I think that's something we really need to think about.
Let me,
Could I just address this
Mr. Wood.
briefly? I feel like, I'm not going to have a contest on who lives more rural than me, but I do. I live out in the county. I'm not in an incorporated area. Evanston is not. I have never had a problem with the current county commission about being responsive to me. They know I vote for them. They come out to my community. I have darkened their doorstep on many issues before, and they've always been responsive. We've not always agreed, but I have no problem with the responsiveness of the county commission here. That's why I feel strongly about my right to vote for all 5 of them. And I feel very strongly about taking away my right to vote for them, 5 commissioners over 8 years, rather than 1 in a single-member district in 8 years. And that's very important to me because that's my voting right, and I just want to make that issue once again. You've heard me say that, and I'll keep saying it. The other thing that's being said, I don't feel like the county, even though we live very rurally, the county represents us. They grade our roads. They mow our right-of-way. They trim our trees more often than we'd like. But I don't feel like that we've ever had non-responsiveness at all from the current county commission or in past commissioners, because I made the statement that, in the 1980s, we came running up here about straightening our road out, and we didn't want to do that, and the county commission was always responsive to us. The other thing that I don't agree with, I'm going to just state this too, I don't see why anybody thinks that you have to have single-member districts to get people elected from the rural areas, because when I sat here and looked over the list that you gave us, about a third of them came from the rural areas. And that's more than the population in the rural areas. And as I said before, you can see my grandfather's picture up here that was elected 4 times from Evanston, the tiniest place in Alachua County. And, it's the best person, period, no matter where they're from. So I don't think we're going to accomplish anything at all changing for the sake of changing. It just doesn't accomplish anything better than what we have. We're doing an experiment here that's probably going to result in disaster and create a greater gulf between the haves and the have-nots in the counties.
appreciate those comments. We need to, Mr. Springfield.
I have great respect for Jack Durrance, and his comment here is so poignant. It's we had single member. It didn't work. It was expensive. It was divisive. And why would we want to go back to that?
I think we all read that. Further comments? The question before us right now is on Mitch's question, by the way.
Mr. Chair, I had my only comment about Mr. Glazer's, and there's kind of a thread through a lot of these proposals, is it's kind of a concerted effort to limit the voters' choices. And that's my objection to Mr. Glazer's proposal, is that I'm now going to have 2 people presented to me as candidates that I didn't have any right to select.
All right. Thank you very much. Mary, I think we're ready to call the roll on Mr. Glazer's proposal, which once again is a bifurcated system. I think we all understand it. If you would call the roll.
Okay.
Is he just changing, amending what's going to be the question, or is this the vote to move it forward? Which one? Is he just, is this the amendment?
That's a good question.
Can we put his language up on screen?
I don't think we've got. Well,
Yeah, let me just make this real.
I haven't even got-
Let me make this simple. I can read tea leaves. I will withdraw the motion and move forward with the other items.
all right. Is that okay with the second?
We'll vote on
All right. Well, okay.
No.
We'll withdraw that. Then the question then is back on 6 then, which is before us up here now. Without objection, we'll let Mr. Glazer then withdraw his question.
May I inquire about number 6?
Yes, sir.
This calls for 5 single members and 2 countywide.
That's correct, yes, sir.
Just from the point of view of resolving the matters that concern those of us who want single-member districts, would that concern be served by 3 countywide and 4 single members, or would that dilute the power of the single member is too much to achieve the purposes. And that's an inquiry I have.
I don't know that anyone knows the answer to that question, Mr. Little.
Are you asking an opinion of people who are supporting it?
We get a lot of opinions here, and I would like to know if anyone has a semi-informed opinion about the question.
I can say that resolves the question of whether or not a voter would vote for a majority of the commission. That resolves that question. Other comments here? All right. I think everybody's ready for number 6?
Yeah.
All right. The question before you then is whether or not we shall, unless there's somebody want to make the motion to switch this out. Mr. Okay, all right. Come forward, Mr. Jennings. We'll recognize you. And then after this question, we're going to talk about what we want to do as far as time here. We may need to call another meeting or something because we're running out of gas. That's right.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, we can call some.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and the Commissioner for being so patient and allowing us to kind of walk through this as you're walking through it. One of my good friends just asked me, is from the questions, if you voted up or down on number 1, up or down, whatever you all decided. No, on number 1, which is the single
Yes, right.
district. Would that not, again, wherever you are, would that not resolve if you went ahead and just did that issue without dealing with 5 and 2 or 4 and 3 and
We may
whatever,
not get to that point.
instead of even doing this now, making the vote on number 6, wherever you are, I don't know where you are, but making that, wouldn't that make it? And I can talk about why I think it's a community together, but just process wise, wouldn't that be the
That may well be what
more
happens.
forthright way to
We
go
understand.
tonight?
That's why it's still out there as number 1, because that deals with the county commission. This deals with the charter commission. That's the difference.
So for those that wanted, you'd have to want more than this one item.
That's right. And that's one of the problems that some of us have with it, is we don't want to confuse the voters with multiple questions on the same thing. We haven't got to that point yet to resolve all those and reconcile between the two and decide what we're really going to do. And that's why, as chair, I don't comment often, but Mr. Little's point is resonating with me that in the end, I'm not so sure I'm going to vote for anything right now. So we'll see what happens. So that's kind of where I am.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say, just since you give me a second or so to talk, that I hope you all, and I understand that, and I take seriously that you wouldn't have requested to be appointed, and you wouldn't have spent the amount of time you did if you didn't care about this county.
That's right.
I understand that, and that's true, and I want to make sure that nobody up there thinks that I don't think that they're making decisions and opining on issues to care about this county. But there are some significant issues, whether it be voting rights issues, whether that's just an opinion, or that I'd hope that in that 6 months before you got here, that there are a lot of us that take some of these issues, some more to heart than others. Some people hadn't thought about it, didn't even know it was an issue, and I respect that was, but that someone in this process should have at least gotten some opinions, whether they find out, because any 2 lawyers any given day can argue before the Supreme Court, and you get Brown, and before that you didn't have Brown. So you don't know what they're going to find out, but at least get somebody to have educated on you. I think that hearing Mr. Stringfellow's comments about Mr. Durrance and that time, that history, again, why would we want to go back? And to me, some of those things that hopefully are being a history of how we got there and how we got here, so that you all would be at least the most informed as you could be in making those decisions. So I'm just concerned that what I don't want this process to do, and I will sit down, I won't comment on the rest of the issues that you all decide on tonight, is I don't want this process with 15 people and 5 commissioners who appointed them to divide this community. Other places like Massachusetts Massachusetts and Florida. We're Florida. We got our own set of issues, our own set of problems, but we are Florida. And we sit here as a Alachua County residents. And I don't want, they don't care about us, or they're trying to do something about us, or the Democrats are trying to do this, or Republicans are trying to do this, and Tea Party's behind this movement. All that stuff's out there. All that stuff's out there right now. And you all are making decisions that are going to impact how we move forward. The city of Gainesville just went through a very divisive election in the city of Gainesville. And I don't want us to go through this. So I hope that you think about that, Mr. Chairman and members, as you move forward, that whatever you all end up doing is one that's inclusive and sensitive to all, not just rural, not excluding rural, but to all of us together. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I too have a lot of respect for Mr. Durrance, but in the almost 60 years since they changed from the county has changed a lot. And I think we have to, I think there are times that one system would suit us and then another system. I think the time has come to look at these other systems and let the county voters decide what they want their county government to look like. I don't think that the 15 people sitting here at this podium, have the right to say the county can't decide on this. I think that these are issues. I think the fact that we have had so many speakers come forward, I have had emails and telephone calls on both sides of every one of these issues. And if the county, if the voters, if the citizens are this connected and this interested, I think we would be doing them a disservice by not taking these ideas forward, at least to the hearings.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, point of
Thank you
information.
very much. Mr. Grimney.
You were talking about with respect to time. This would be the last absolute hearing that we could bring forth anything. So to say we have another additional hearing, I wanted to address that matter before we move forward.
I don't know if that's correct.
Well,
Is that correct?
well, the charter allows the chairman to call a meeting. If we felt like we needed another meeting, we'd have another meeting.
Well, that's why I asked.
And
that's why I was asking,
right.
Mr. Chair.
And so let's see where we are tonight. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, Commissioner, I appreciate your comments because you're exactly right. I must debate what Mr. Jennings said. Really, you guys aren't deciding what's going to be best for the county. The voters will. So, and your comment, Ms. Ferguson, as far as getting more education and information out there, the only way to get that information is by passing these so that we can garner the information and we can make an informed decision. Thank you.
Appreciate those comments.
For the sake of clarity, I can talk on my way over, but Mike Bowie, President
yeah.
of the Alachua County.
Come on, because we're on television, so we want them to hear you
very
well.
much.
Thank you, Dr.
Mike Bowie, President of the Alachua County branch of the NAACP. What is the role of this commission?
The role of this commission is to determine whether or not there are any issues, any charter amendments that are advisable to put before the voters in November. That's the role of our commission.
So there is a decision component to this commission, correct?
We make the decision what issues are going to go to the ballot.
Absolutely. And there were 25 items that came forth originally, correct?
Quite a few. I don't recall the number, but there's more than that. Yeah, I think.
Oh, there could have been more than that.
But
Right.
some of them
So some decisions have already been made, correct?
Yeah, we
So I'm just trying to clarify what we just talked about, because the reality is this board does have a charge, and that's what they're doing at this particular time.
And we're vetting
I just let
this.
people come forward and talk a little bit more and let you discuss these factors, but you do have a charge in this.
And we're vetting them, and you're absolutely right, because, I mean, we there's only a limit to the amount of, in my mind, the issues we can put on the ballot. Whether or not, and I've started out this process thinking we put 2 or 3. Right now, we're way above that, so we'll see where we end up. But that's where we are. But you're right.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Martin first.
Okay, then we'll go to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had quite a few people come to the dais and tell me something about what my father did or didn't do, and I've heard that a time or two over my years. And I'm very proud of that particular lineage. But I think he'd be one of the first people to say, since he's been quoted here several times, that you need to deal with the facts as they are now. He used to quote Charles de Gaulle, who said that the graveyard is full of indispensable men. And for us to think, and with all due respect, I think that some other have made examples. People are citing my father and your grandfather. To me, if you look at it, and I'm not all due respect, if you look at that chart that was given to us, if people are asking what the problem is, what are we trying to solve, and I keep telling you, my main focus is, because people know where I come from, so I'm looking at that from that perspective, but I also want what's best for the county. In the last 20 years, and I know you can always throw out, and I don't mean to belittle anyone, but you can always throw out, people are living here now or from there and all that. I don't think anyone would say that the county commission is not dominated by the city of Gainesville from an electric point of view. Okay, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. it's a given. No matter what you draw, it's going to be that way. But what people are telling me, and have been telling me over the years, is they would like to see some way that they feel like, somebody talked about, Mr. Chestnut talked about people going into black churches. Well, I can tell you that people campaign all the time when they come through Hawthorne, but not very few of them ever come back individually and talk to us as city commissioners when I was on it. Very, very few. Okay, and I've heard that from multiple different things. I'll give you an issue right now that is happening right before us that shows you, in my opinion, that the rural representation is not as solid as it probably should be. They're two-laning Main Street right now. I'm not debating on the merits of it one way or another. The decision's been made. It's over with. But I sat on the MTPO and talked about it and brought in letters and brought in correspondences and had people come before from every single rural city commission. Every one of them had a letter, I believe it was endorsed by every mayor in every small municipality. They were 100% opposed to that for two reasons. One was that they thought that it limited access to county facilities for people who have to travel a distance. But the other big one, and people mention roads, okay? Yes, the county has a huge deficit on roads. But a lot of people don't know this. When that vote, this used to be a state highway that was totally maintained by state funds for the most part, right? That decision then made it where the county, whether you agree with the decision or not is another issue, but the decision made it where the county and the city of Gainesville, but I'm primarily talking about the county, had to assume some of the responsibility for the portions in their county to maintain that. When people in the rural area have been begging for monies to fix roads in that area, not necessarily in their cities, but in that area, and the county commission, rightfully so, has been limited. Their dollars are extremely limited. But there are a lot of people who thought that decision was a very poor decision for the county as a whole. It may have been a great decision for the city of Gainesville. That is just one example of what I'm talking about. People are asking for examples. There's an example of why people in rural communities don't think that they are being represented in an adequate number. I would love to see this thing go to some type of, I think what Mr. Little said was an interesting suggestion, where we have a majority still from the county as a whole and single-member districts. But that's the issues that people are looking at. So to say that there are, are not legitimate issues that people are coming forward with, I think does a disservice to the reality that a lot of people feel out there, regardless of parties.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brinkman, did you still want to comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to make the observation that, as you correctly pointed out, our charge, if people really feel strongly, disagree with this commission, that there is a need to place a charter amendment, besides the petition method, they can go to the county commission, which has the authority to do that for them, if they can convince the county commission that it's something that's really necessary. Now, some members have spoken about the lack of information, and I wholeheartedly agree. So I would like to request staff to prepare a demographic breakdown of Alachua County and all of the cities within Alachua County. I believe the Supervisor of Elections has some of this information, and I think it would be very helpful if we could see how this proposal, I'm speaking of the single-member districts, would affect the county, and based on the demographics. And finally, I'm not sure where we're going here, but I actually would like to make one very brief proposal for a charter amendment. I realize that...
Let me inquire on your question there first, and we'll come back to those before we adjourn tonight. Are you talking about just population or the demographics?
Well, when I say demographics, I'm talking about like the statistics on the supervisor side. I believe they have it by party, by race,
by precinct, so you can get an idea.
Right, by gender, et cetera.
It's a litany of demographics. But
Okay,
yes,
right.
And it'll be broken down by voting precinct is what they...
Yeah, or just, that's probably the easier way for
Census
staff
tracts
to do
are
it.
10 years old now, so
Right.
it's not really good, but anyway.
Well, I think the supervisor's information is current in that, but going to a charter, if we're going to have another meeting where we're still accepting new proposals, I can wait. but otherwise, I'll just real briefly, a lot of concern has been raised about the pay rate of county commissioners. And to me, I think the real concern ought to be how they're doing their jobs. And frankly, what I would propose as an alternative, as it were, to regulating or capping their pay would be simply to define in the charter the job of a county commissioner as being a full-time job, and that makes them accountable to the voters for proper attention to the duties of their office.
Mr. Brinkman, if I might offer as a friendly amendment to that.
Please.
As two things were brought up tonight regarding that issue. We could, rather than having it placed on the charter, we could place on the charter to simply say to members of the commission, you need to, I want to make sure I word this properly. Rather than putting and say we're going to make your salary X, Y, or Z, we could say you need to you need to draw what your salary is going to be. You need to state what your salary is going to be. We need to state that they need to do that every so often.
They can't do that under state law.
That's part of the problem.
Good point.
All right.
So,
I did like the mayor's proposal.
Mr. Chair, I know we keep talking about time.
Right.
We address that.
I was trying to finish this one question, and then I was going to do it.
Before you do, I want to say,
Okay.
I want to
Right.
make an
Well,
amendment.
and on this, I know this maybe after I just said, can we get this over with? I did want to ask you, I wasn't sure if that was that a motion you made as
Yeah.
far as staff?
yes, it was.
We already have another motion.
Well, what we'll do on as far as staff is at the end, I'm going to say without objection to work on the demographics and also
Okay.
on
That's fine.
opinion on
I guess
five.
the point I was making,
Yeah.
and I want to echo what Commissioner Ferguson said, and I think I said this a couple times, is that in the need for information. Mayor Hanrahan pointed out that it was so. Sorry about that. Okay. Mayor Hanrahan pointed out that she had an informal discussion with someone who she references having some expertise on the issue, and I would like to hear from that person, because I think I asked Mr. Marsh, was that the individual that what evidence did he have that some of these items would be feasible, or would it do? And I haven't heard a lot of that so far. I heard a lot of anecdotal information. So if we can get someone, staff can generate some information, if we can bring someone who actually has some expertise on this, I would like to hear from that person.
So I want to ask one of
What we want to do as far as Mr. Brinkman's question there, since it hadn't really been put on the table yet, when we get to salaries, can we take that up at that
Sure.
time? And try to
As long as, I just wanted to raise it before I lost the ability to raise it. I understand.
We'll make sure that you get that about. Yes, Bob.
Regarding number 6, I would like to make a motion that we amend it so that it has 4 commissioners elected from districts and 3 at large.
Okay. Second. Been moved and seconded, 4 and 3 substituting that as far as the 5.
I'm not going to vote for it.
Any comments on that?
I just want to get clarification.
Yes.
Did you say that it had 4 single member and 3 at large, or
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
is that what you said earlier, Mr.?
That's what I said there.
Okay.
Okay. Questions on this amendment? Seeing none, those in favor of the amendment say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Call the roll. Call it, Mayor, if you'll call the roll, Mayor.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Back to Commissioner Martin's point, though.
We're calling the roll right now. We're calling the roll.
Mr. York? No?
Can we call our vote?
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mrs. Martin? Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Stringfellow?
No.
Mr. Richards? Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Obronsi Martin?
No.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Irby?
No.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Glazer? No. Ms. Ferguson?
Okay.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
And Mr. Ackerman?
Yes.
Okay, by your votes, the amendment fails. So we're back on the question number 6 as it is. I think we're ready to call the roll on that at this time. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I'm finally getting some votes here. All right.
Yeah.
Call the roll. Question 6 as it reads. 5 elected from districts, 2 countywide.
Mr. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Ms. Ferguson? No. Mr. Glazer?
On 6, no.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Irby?
No.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Martin? Albrasi?
No.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
No.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
No.
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mr. York?
No.
By your votes, then the motion fails, so that item is no longer under consideration. Let me do some work here to see. It is 9:30. I think we've gone about as far as we can go, and pay attention. And so,
I wanted to make a motion that we have another special meeting.
all right.
Holy.
Our meetings are very difficult to arrange, as you can imagine. Mary did a tremendous job getting this one done. The alternative would be to, knowing that we have much to do yet in listening to the citizens and research and contacting different people, would be to allow that we basically advertise that still under consideration would be, and I'm just offering this as a thought, the items that 1 through 4, along with that we're still considering single-member districts and nonpartisan elections in a generic sense, just to alert the public that we're still thinking about that. And then come back on May the 12th, listen to the public. That'll be their night, for sure. And if they should finish under a couple of hours, then we can talk some more about it. And basically just go forward, knowing that we haven't agreed to anything. And I think that the only question is, I mean, if we don't want any one of these items, I think there's only one more really controversial item that's left out there, single-member districts, and nonpartisan is still on the table too. Those two, if y'all like to take a quick vote to see if we want that, or if, I mean, there's a lot of debate, a lot of going on, or we can just say these are still on the table and allow the citizens to address us again. Mr. Little.
Chairman, we have debated them endlessly, so why don't we vote on them
Why
up
don't we
and
just
down?
vote them?
I'll second that.
If y'all hold your debate down, we can do that.
No debate, let's just vote.
All right.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Martin.
I just want to say that I agree 100% with that. As someone who has vehemently and advocated for my position, I'm ready to see if it's voted or not, and if not, I'm ready to move on. So,
All right. Okay.
you know.
Well, in that case, why don't we take up question 7, voting only. I think everybody's had their say. Maybe everybody hadn't said it, but I think everything's been said. And so,
I agree.
And so, question 7, which is elect 5 charter commissioners from electors by the electors in single-member districts. That's the question before you at this time. Mary, call the roll.
Mr. York?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mr. Stringfellow?
No.
Mr. Richards? Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
No.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Irby?
Can't promise I'll do this in the end, but yes.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson?
No.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
And Mr. Ackerman?
Motion.
By your votes, that question is defeated, and so it will not go forward.
Number 8.
Number 8, nonpartisan election of Board of County Commissioners.
Could you tell us what the vote
It was, I'm sorry, it was 8-7. 8 to
That was
7.
one about the previous.
Am I correct in that?
The previous.
The previous one was
9-6. Oh. Number 5.
7 yes.
Mr. Chair, I'd appreciate it if you would announce the votes,
I
just for the
apologize.
record.
I
you
should
know.
have done that. I'll let Mary do that. Mary should actually counting here. But I had 8 to 7, is that correct?
Yes.
8 to 7 voting no, and on the previous question, 6, what was that?
9 to 6.
9 to 6.
I don't know where that one is.
Number 5 was 9 to 6.
The other one was like 11 to something.
Yeah, I had 11 to 4.
Okay, that's about right.
Is that right? 11 to 4?
I actually have 10 to 5.
10-5? Okay. I took my glasses off there for a minute, so I appreciate you saying that. Okay.
Moving along.
She recorded the actual vote. Okay, nonpartisan election for the Board of County Commissioners. Nonpartisan election is question number 8. Question 8.
Mr. Ackerman?
No.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Ms. Ferguson?
No.
Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
No.
Mr. Martin?
As Mr. Irby said, for now, yes.
Mr. Richards?
No.
Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin? Yes. Mr. Wood?
No.
Mr. York?
Yes.
It passes.
Announce the vote.
We have 8 in favor and 7 against.
Okay, then that question will go forward to the public hearing.
Mr. Chair?
8 to 7. Mr. Grundy.
I guess, so we can clarify, because I also wanted, like Mr. Brinkman wanted to bring something before, but I don't want to do it tonight.
Okay.
So I want to be able to still have the ability to bring forward proposals.
You can always bring forward proposals even after the public hearing. This will be an open meeting, and things, when we hear the public, we want to hear what they've got to say, and things may change and may come up in our mind that we want to talk about.
Well, based off that, I mean, during the public hearing, we almost had a public hearing tonight, and we got very what we wanted to get done.
We'll meet as long and as even,
Number
if
9.
we can't solve it by the last public hearing, we'll set up another meeting later in June, and we'll keep going until we
Okay, as long as I
solve
have it,
it.
thank
I
you.
don't either.
That's right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
clarify something for me.
Yes, ma'am.
So, questions 5 and 8 will be packaged together, correct?
Yep.
5,
So far.
8 is contingent on 5. That's
Right.
correct. That's correct.
Could I ask a question?
And that would be the same for question 9 and 10, if those passes. Those would be packaged with 5.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And they'd just be renumbered and so forth, and we'll set it up nice and clean. Okay, as far as I...
One
Yes,
very
yes, sir, Mr. Martin.
question on just the one we just passed, the nonpartisan.
Yes, sir.
Is that one of the issues, and I asked this for our attorney, is that one of the issues that on its own would potentially not be constitutional, or is that one of the ones that would be,
That's correct.
one of the ones that would?
not be.
It would not be a stand, it could not be a stand?
The only one that's allowed under the law is single-member district.
Okay, thank you.
Under the current
I'll
commission.
ask that question again.
All right.
Get it right in my head. Mr. Chairman.
That's right. We're now on term limits for charter commissioners, term limits.
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I would move we change the 8 consecutive years to 12 consecutive years.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we change 8 consecutive years to 12 consecutive years.
You're returning.
Is there a discussion on that?
No.
You made the maker of the motion.
Yes, sir,
Just
Mr. Little.
state the reason.
Mr. Lowe.
I am persuaded that the term limits in the legislature are too short, and that we have lost something in the legislature, and I think the same would be true here. I do believe 12 is enough, and we don't lose anything, and that by cutting it at 8, we may be losing some of the continuity that is valuable in the commission.
I echo those sentiments.
Thank you. And the record that we were provided showed that only 9 commissioners in the last 50 years out of 32 had actually served more than 8 years. And so,
And Mr. Chair, if I may just really quickly comment, the statement you just made argues for why we don't need this amendment. We don't need term limits because in all those years, only 9 ever exceeded that. It's not a problem. We don't need a solution.
We should go ahead and vote on it.
We can always vote them out.
All right, Mary, I think we're ready to call the question on, this is on the amendment. On the amendment. 8 to 12, and if that passes, then we'll go to the next one.
Okay.
This is on only the question whether or not we're changing the term from 8 to 12 years.
Mr. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Ms. Ferguson?
Okay, yes.
Mr. Glazer?
Who?
You.
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Obrancy Martin? Want
This
me
is
to come
only on
back?
the amendment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Only on the amendment.
I know, because. All right. I noticed that we kind of blew past this whole adjourning thing. I know that. But,
Vote.
yes.
All right.
Mr. John Martin?
I support the 12. I would have been reluctant to support 2, but I support 12.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
And Mr. York?
Yes.
Okay.
Vote against it anyway.
Mr. Richards, you said no, right? Okay, so we have 12 yes and 3 no.
Okay, now the question before you is question number 9, term limit for charter commissioners. However, it is for 12 consecutive years. If a person would not qualify if they had served 12 consecutive years, or but for resignation would have served 12 consecutive years. Mr. Grundy,
Motion to question.
we're ready to go. Everybody understands the question? All right, call the roll.
Mr. Ackerman?
I'm opposed to term limits in general, but I'll vote yes to move this along.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Why would you vote yes to move it?
Ms.
along?
Ferguson?
I don't understand that.
Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Irby?
No.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Obrancy Martin?
I know this is a bit inconsistent, but no.
Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
No.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mr. York?
Yes.
That's 8 no and 7 yes.
Wow.
All right. A motion then fails and no longer before us at this time. Limiting the salary of the members of the chair and the Board of County Commissioners.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would make an amendment that rather than limiting the salary by some sort of formula, that we merely permit the county commission to set their own salary.
Second.
And-
We just.
And that is actually the Charter Commission.
Charter commission, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was about to say.
Right. So amending this motion, that rather than setting a percentage, that the county commission would adopt their own, or the charter commission would adopt their own salary. Everybody understand the question?
Could I ask a question on that?
Yes, sir.
As far as is it within our privy to determine how the vote would go, in a sense that it have to be a simple majority or a super majority like 4? Because I know some commissions, it has to be at least like 5-member commissions, it has to be
Supermajority.
4
Right.
as opposed to just 3. I'm just asking.
Right.
Is that something
You
that we
could
would do or not?
You could do it, absolutely.
You making a motion?
If the rest of this flies to start with.
Salaries are set by ordinance, and state law had tells you how to make ordinances. I just mentioned that.
That's a good point. Thank you, Mr. Little. I appreciate that very much. All right, well, the question before us then is on the amendment. And the amendment is, rather than designated a particular percentage of salary as compared to a non-charter county, that the county commission by ordinance would then set their salary, whatever they deem appropriate.
And
Okay?
Mr. Chair, was there a second to that? I didn't. Okay.
Mr. Ackerman? Mr. Brinkman?
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson? Was that a yes? Mr. Glazer?
Yes. Itself.
Mr. Grundy?
Yes.
Mr. Irby?
An amendment.
Yes.
They would set their own.
Mr. Little?
Mr. Obrancy Martin?
No.
Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood? Mr. York? The yeses have it, 12 to 3.
Okay, now the question before you is whether or not we'll place on the ballot limiting the salary of members of the Board of County, the Board of Charter Commissioners, and again, now the salary be set by ordinance by the Charter Commissioners. Call the roll.
Mr. Ackerman?
I'm sorry.
It's the same question.
Where are we now?
Your-
We voted
your-
on the amendment
Oh,
first.
I'm sorry, yes.
And this is as amended.
I got
As
it.
is your amendment, okay? Believe me, we're all starting to drift. We understand. We have one yes. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Brinkman?
I'd just like to note we're a bunch of lightweights because the county commission regularly sits through far longer meetings. Yes.
What, we said full-time job, right?
Ms. Ferguson?
No.
Yeah.
Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
No.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Obrancy Martin?
No.
Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
No.
And Mr. York?
Yes.
We have 5 against. That must mean 10-4.
Okay. That means that goes on to the public
Accept.
hearing where we'll hear what the citizens have to
I
say.
didn't say to sound too assuring.
Mr. Ackerman, thank you for giving me something I could vote for tonight.
All right.
Number 11.
Mr.
Do we
Chair.
want to do number 11 or number 1? Those were all part of a package there.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
can we see whether we can schedule another meeting to take up the remaining issues?
Second.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
We can certainly do that. What's the pleasure of the commission? If
Well,
somebody
can,
like
we,
to
can,
make a
we, can, I,
motion?
can I speak to that a
Yes,
little
sir.
bit? And I know because I'm hearing commissioners talking about, excuse me, I drifted. Anything to move this along. I understand we want to go home and we want to get this done, but I think we're giving people a disservice if we don't have our full attention here.
Mr. Chair, I actually want to propose that we maybe come back in 2 weeks.
Okay.
The issue is whether we have any place to come back to.
What we will, is that a motion that we set another meeting?
Yes, I'm making a motion that we come back in 2 weeks.
That we recess this meeting until another time?
Yes.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second of that. Mr. Martin?
I would like the motion or second to consider maybe a friendly amendment to that our next meeting be be set by the staff in conjunction with the meeting availability, the next regular legal meeting we can have in this room
I will,
at 5:30.
well, I think, you know what, to make it simple upon Mary and staff, I think we should ask we can't, because everybody in there, everybody's going to either have to go to some kind of meeting, within 2 weeks yes, I'll accept that friendly amendment, because I want to,
Anyway, I think that went.
as long as it can be here and access to the public and on TV, yes.
The next possible televised
Yeah.
meeting in this room.
In this room.
Right. And do y'all have any problem with any particular nights?
We need to resolve that. We should resolve that here.
Mondays and Fridays are about all we have.
Monday.
Right. And I was so proud of all 15 being here tonight. that
So that
Not
Monday
on
would
what
be
night?
what, May 1st, May 2nd?
2 weeks.
Not May 3rd.
May 3rd?
No, not May 3rd.
Not May 3rd.
Not May 3rd.
What's May 3rd?
Oh, I forgot. Yes.
I don't want May 3rd.
Yeah, I forgot May 3rd. Yeah, not May 3rd. There's a big commission. There's a big city commission meeting on May 3rd. There's a major.
Yeah, that's probably true. Probably true. Well,
So would you like me to amend it to make it a week?
All the questions.
Well, there's a motion on the floor.
Told
Mr.
everyone on
Chair.
some of those dates.
All right.
The 28th was our original date, wasn't it?
let me keep it. Let's see if we want to recess.
I think the
first.
26th I'll
See if we
try.
want to recess first, and
Okay,
then we'll
Mr.
determine
Chair,
that.
Mr. Chair, I'm actually going to withdraw my motion so we can vote on the other two issues and get going.
All right, everybody's ready to hang in there for another few minutes? Is that what I'm hearing now?
Does that make everybody happy? All right.
All right, here we go. We're going to number one. We are going to number one, single-member districts for the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay. Mr. Ackerman? Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Ms. Ferguson? No. Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
This is single-member district
No.
for the Board of County Commissioners.
No.
All right.
Mr. Irby?
For now, yes.
Mr. Little? Yes. Mr. Abrancy Martin?
No.
Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
No.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mr. York?
Yes.
I have 7 yes and 8 against.
Then the motion fails, and so single-member districts is off the board for now. Nonpartisan election for Board of County Commissioners. Now,
We already.
this was taken up under the other section,
What you got passed?
which is, so without objection, since, was that one was agreed to?
Yes.
Since that's now under the Charter Commission, which is what our attorney has told us is our only legal avenue possibly to reach there, would you agree that we drop number 2?
Yes.
Is there,
Yes.
without objection?
Without objection.
All right, number 2 is then dropped. Citizen initiative petition requirements for ordinances. Question 3, this is reducing the number of signatures from 7% to 5% of the total number of electors to place an ordinance on the general election. Call the roll.
Mr. Ackerman? Yes. Mr. Brinkman?
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson?
I say yes for now.
Mr. Glazer? I'm sorry, Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
Yes.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Abrancy Martin?
Yes, for the time being.
Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards? Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Can we do it?
Mr. York?
Yes.
Is that unanimous?
Yes.
Wow. Mr. Brinkman's proposal is our...
Actually, I think this was
Oh,
not
this
mine.
was Joe Little, isn't it? All right, question number 4.
I'd like to make amendment to number 4.
All right,
That it
I'm
be,
recognizing Mr. Glazer.
that it, instead of a unanimous vote, it should be a 4/5 vote.
4/5.
Yes.
Been moved and seconded to become a supermajority, as they call it, during the year 2 to 5 in order to override an ordinance passed by the voters.
And that's an amendment, so we'll
Yes.
vote on that first. Let's go ahead and do it.
Supermajority rather than unanimous vote.
Can I ask one quick question? Is there any vote on the county level that requires a unanimous vote of the county commission?
Mr. Irving might be better able to answer that than anyone.
I'm unaware. Supermajority.
Okay, right.
Yes, there are.
What is that? Oh, millage, where there's a vote if you want to raise the millage, but not for a regular millage.
It has to be unanimous.
That's
It's
right.
above.
That's right. And a unanimous, but that would be the only one. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right. The question then has been moved and seconded on amendment to make it a supermajority rather than unanimous vote. Call the roll.
Mr. Ackerman?
Yes, sir.
Before we, to clarify, is this for after the first?
Yes, sir.
Yes, years.
I'm not sure this language is the clearest, so
I
whatever we could ask.
raised that issue.
2 through 5, yeah. We've got a note on that, and Ms. Blakely will be taking a look at it. Yes, sir. Until we're happy with it. On the supermajority question.
Mr. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman?
No.
Ms. Ferguson? Yes. Mr. Glazer?
Yes.
Mr. Grundy?
Yes.
Mr. Irby?
Yes.
Mr. Little?
Yes.
Mr. Abrancy Martin?
Yes.
Mr. John Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Richards?
Yes.
Mr. Stringfellow?
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle?
Yes.
Mrs. Martin?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
No.
Mr. York?
Yes.
The yeses have it, 13-2.
Okay. The amendment then is agreed to, and now the main motion as amended is before us. Call the roll.
Mr. Ackerman?
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman,
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson,
As amended, right?
as amended. Mr. Glazer,
Yes.
Mr. Grundy,
Yes.
Mr. Irby,
Yes.
Mr. Little, Mr. Obrancy Martin,
Yes.
Mr. John Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Richards,
Yes.
Mr. Stringfellow,
Yes.
Mr. Tuttle,
Yes.
Mrs. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Wood, Mr. York.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Thank you very much. We only have one question left. Question number 11, which is abolishing constitutional officers and replacing with charter officers elected in a nonpartisan election.
Vote on that too.
That's the question before you. Number 11.
Here we go.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
On the other issues with the county commission, we took up the issue of how they set their salary. Under this, how would these salaries be set, if, assuming this passed?
They retain all of the rights, duties, and emoluments and so forth that set by state law. It still go to
Governed
town.
by state law, the salaries and all that.
Everything under the way that is written here remains exactly the same except the way they're elected.
Propose this?
Wait a minute.
I don't remember.
Joe Little. No?
No, he didn't. Who proposed this, Mary?
This is number 11.
If I can, I remember. I think what happened, I don't remember exact who, but I think Mr. Tuttle started out proposing.
Yeah, that's
this.
correct.
And I amended it.
Supervisor of elections, and someone, I don't know. who,
That was me.
Okay.
Made an amendment to
Oh,
it
that's
and
right.
said, well, they'd consider it if they did it for everybody.
See what you did?
I believe that's.
I think you're correct.
You're right.
Mr. Martin's correct. He's refreshed our memories.
Thank you. I was curious. I wanted to.
All
I'm
right.
not fading, sir.
And I
you're
might
doing
note,
great.
Mr.
very
Chair, if
proud.
I may, that
Mr.
it would be helpful if staff would include those kinds of steps in the minutes. I like your brief minutes, but maybe they're just a little too brief.
I think it listed the amendment, but that's, the amendment was listed in there, I know
Who
that.
proposed, blah, blah, blah.
I think it was in there, yeah. Anyway, we'll double check.
You're asking for who proposed it, right?
Mr. Martin?
Ms. Blakely, would it be correct that if these became charter officers, that salary would still be dictated by state law, or is it going to be whatever the charter?
Yes, the salaries would be exactly the same as under current law.
And it couldn't change the charter?
You could change them in another charter amendment,
Okay.
or you could include them in this amendment.
Okay.
Ready to vote.
Clarify, it becomes possible to change them, but this amendment does not actually change them.
That's correct. The only thing this amendment changes is the election going to nonpartisan, that's all. All right, call the roll.
Mr. Ackerman,
Yes.
Mr. Brinkman,
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson,
I'm confused about something that the chair just said. Could I get some
Yes,
clarity?
please.
You just said that this issue just deals with whether the election is nonpartisan, but it also abolishes the officers increase.
That's improper. That's not constitutional.
Yes, it is.
I'm reading question 11.
Right, I understand what you're saying. The way that it's written, and Ms. Blakely's here to talk, it retains in the language all of the duties, powers, and authority of the office. And so that's the way this is set up in the Constitution.
It's a little bit like the Charter Commission idea, except it relates to the constitutional officers. The Constitution on constitutional officers says that you can abolish those officers and offices, and then you can elect them in the way that you want to. You can transfer all their duties and elect them in the way that you want to. There's a court case that says unless you've done that, you can't have them be nonpartisan.
But my point is, this particular item does two things then. It abolishes the office, and then it replaces them with charter office, elected, and actually does three things.
It abolishes those offices, transfers all those duties to identically named officers, except we call them charter officers, and it requires that they be elected in nonpartisan elections.
Okay, that's three things.
Three things, right.
Point of information. Oh, go ahead, Abrancy.
Well, once if that happens, these officers are no longer constitutional officers. They're not. Are they still deemed independent, or are they answering to another body? Yeah.
They are still deemed independent. They've got all the same responsibilities, powers, and duties as their similarly named constitutional officers, but they are charter officers, and they're going to be elected in a nonpartisan way.
Okay? Ms. Ferguson, we want to be clear on this because
Yeah.
I don't want anybody voting.
So-
They're not clear.
Actually, it's next, but go ahead.
It is possible that, and I'm just kind of speculating here, if all of these move forward, that we may have a Board of County Commissioners. The voters may deny replacing the Board of County Commissioners with charter officers, but approve abolishing constitutional officers and replacing those with charter officers.
And making
Right.
them nonpartisan. Yes.
Mr.
So everything would still operate, if that happens, everything would still function the way it functions now, correct?
Yes, except for the nonpartisan election.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not comfortable with some of the wording in that. I thought that when we had things worded, it had to be to a single entity or single rule, and not be a multitude of issues that are worded. This is very confusing.
Well, I tried to take the language from the Constitution, and on the question of whether you can have multiple subjects in a charter amendment, there's at least one appellate court that says you can have multiple subjects. There's not a single subject requirement in the Constitution for charter amendments. You just have to make sure that basic due process is given to voters. And we can tinker around with the wording, but that the voters have to know what they're voting on.
But was not the Supreme Court decision that it had to be single issue, not a multitude issue?
Constitutional amendments.
Constitutional amendments are required to be single subject except in some limited circumstances.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Brinkman.
if I may make a brief statement in support of this. Basically, my thinking was that while I believe legislative policy-making boards like the Board of County Commissioners should be elected in a partisan election, I think it is perfectly appropriate to elect what you could call ministerial functions, people whose job is basically set by law, and they're just there to execute the job, conduct elections, enforce the law, what have you. It's more appropriate to elect them in a nonpartisan fashion.
Oh, well.
Mr.
I don't
Martin.
know if the office of sheriff is ministerial. I mean, you can sit there and say that A, B, C, and D, and that's all they got to do until they come knock on your door and come get you. So yeah.
Did we start over?
What,
I think we need another meeting.
well, we're down to the last. We're almost there. Mr. Martin, John Martin.
Thank you. Is it possible? I have two. One question and a point. I noticed in the number 5 it says. Let me back up. There's different language. Okay, in question number 5, it says that shall the Board of County Commissioners of Alachua County be replaced with a Board of Charter Commissioners, but then in question 11 it says to abolish the existing constitutional officers, because to me, if the word abolish would make it sound like there's not going to be an elected sheriff anymore, which is really not the point of this. Is that?
Read the whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you.
It says nonpartisan elections.
I'm simply telling you, in my opinion, that if that I'm asking, is there a reason why it's worded that way?
Absolutely.
Why can't I ask a question? I'm asking.
All right, let's stay in order here. Let's stay in order. We're almost there, everyone. We're almost there.
The Constitution says that those 5 constitutional officers shall be elected for a term of 4 years, except when provided by county charter or special law. Any county officer may be chosen in another manner, or any county office may be abolished when all the duties of the office are transferred to another office. It seems like you have your choice, but based on the District Court of the Supreme Court opinion in Cook versus City of Jacksonville. They said that in order to subject their constitutional officers to nonpartisan elections, you had to actually abolish that office and transfer all those duties to something else, and then you could choose them by nonpartisan elections.
Okay. So I think it's fair to say that the point of this, if it were to pass, is not to do away with them, but to merely subject them, if for lack of a better word, to make potential future charter amendments that may actually alter, like pay and those types of things. But this one would only make it nonpartisan. That's the only actual change it would make, other than bringing them under potential future charter amendments. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I chose the word abolish in this case because that's what the Constitution uses. I used the term replace in the other case because abolish sounds so harsh. We can use the same word if you want, maybe make more sense, but that's something up to you all.
And we can have that discussion another day.
Yes.
We can't.
All right, let's hold it together.
That was interesting commentary.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're voting on
attorney.
number 11, which is whether or not the constitutional officers will be made charter officers and elected on a nonpartisan basis, and we'll continue to wordsmith these questions until we get there. Call the roll.
Starting over, Mr. Ackerman. Yes. Okay. Mr. Brinkman.
Yes.
Ms. Ferguson.
I have discomfort with this, but I'm going to go say yes and see what happens.
Mr. Glazer.
Yes.
Mr. Grundy.
No.
Mr. Irby.
I don't like the word abolish, but I'll go yes for now.
Mr. Little.
Look at Mary's phone.
Mr. Obransi Martin.
No.
Mr. John Martin.
Yes, and I agree with the chairman.
Mr. Richards.
I don't like it either.
Mr. Stringfellow.
No.
Mr. Tuttle.
Yes.
Mrs. Martin.
Yes.
Mr. Wood. Mr. York.
Yes.
We have 5 no, 10 yes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations. I think we're now ready to advertise for the public hearing, the questions that we'll bring forward. And again, I caution all those that are watching that no final decision has been made. And in fact, the final decision will be made by the voters of this county. Let me make my announcement here if I might. But the questions that are going to, at this point, go to the public hearing or citizens initiative petition requirement change, the limitation of the county commissioner's authority to amend or repeal an ordinance approved by citizen initiative, the replacement of the Board of County Commissioners with a Board of Charter Commissioners,
I'm going to put it in my...
nonpartisan election of the Board of County Commissioners, limitation or limiting the salary of the Board of County Commissioners by ordinance, and abolishing the constitutional officers and making them charter officers elected on a nonpartisan basis. If I've recorded your votes correctly, that's where we are at this time. We're going to have a public hearing on May the 12th to hear everything the citizens have to say. And again, we haven't made any decisions on these questions yet, and will not until we've heard from our citizens in 3 different public hearings. Mr. Grundy Gomez has to be recognized.
No, I want to be clear, so I can still, even
Okay.
still bring up, just so I want to be clear.
What we'll do is listen to the public. The way it works is we open the public hearing, we listen to them without comment, almost pretty much. And then at the end of that, when there are no further citizens wanting to speak, we'll close the public hearing, and at that time, this board then will be back in operation.
And Mr. Chairman.
Let me, Mr. Little, and then Ms. Ferguson.
I just like to announce that regrettably I will not be here on May 12th.
Okay, sir.
Take good notes, please.
We will, sir.
And
you
my
can-
not being here doesn't indicate lack of interest.
We appreciate that, and we appreciate the attendance that so many of you have sacrificed to make to these meetings. And again, that meeting, Mr. Little, as somebody said earlier, will be available to you on the Internet, that you can watch it before we go into further public hearings if you should desire to do so.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick point of order, if I got a question
Yes,
to
sir.
understand the process. Anything that was not passed today going forward to the May 12th meeting, then you can only discuss, there can be no more initiatives coming forward.
No.
Is that correct or not correct? That's what I'm
not correct.
understanding.
That's not correct.
Okay.
What's going to happen is we're going to we pretty much said as a board tonight what we're willing to still consider. But once we've heard from our citizens, there may be something that comes up that we want to bring forward.
A new idea.
A new idea. And so at that point, if 8 of us want to continue on and bring that new idea and do some study and research and so forth, we'll do that.
That includes things that were defeated tonight could also be brought back.
Well, it would take a couple of votes by just like the city commission one would, but each time it gets harder to do
you,
that.
Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I understand.
And so that's
Mr.
where we.
Chair, before-
Eddie, if a citizen wanted to bring back up something we voted down, it would be.
Oh, the
back-
citizens can speak about anything they want to. Citizens can speak about anything they want to.
But, Mr. Chair, I really do think we should set a time limit for each speaker. So I don't know how many people are going to show up. Maybe we won't need that.
What we'll
But-
do is put our light system into work next time, and we'll start out with 3 minutes and
Okay.
see how it goes.
That's
Is that
good.
okay with the board? Without objection, we'll address those other questions that you had, and without objection, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you very much.